Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on renting to refugees and the benefits to landlords. Let me start by introducing myself and the work of Southwestern PA Housing Alliance and the Rental Housing Work Group. My name is Gail Schwartz, and I am the coordinator for both the Southwestern PA Housing Alliance and the Rental Housing Work Group. Convened by the Southwestern PA Housing Alliance, the Rental Housing Work Group is a coalition of organizations and individuals committed to expanding affordable quality rental options for individuals and families who face barriers to housing. Using collaboration, coordination, education, and risk management, we bring nonprofits together with rental housing owners and managers to advance the goal of a home within reach of every Southwestern Pennsylvanian. Since December 2014, the Rental Housing Work Group has been working to educate landlords about best practices when working with tenants, information about how local resources can meet landlord needs, and highlight beneficial resources such as PA Housing Search. Now I would like to introduce our presenters today. First, we have Leslie Eisenman from Jewish Family and Children's Services and Taylor Hennessy from Northern Area Multi-Service Center. Ladies?
You want me to start?
Yes.
Okay. So this is Leslie Eisenman, and I'm Director of Refugee and Immigrant Services at Jewish Family and Children's Services. We offer refugee resettlement, employment, case management, and service coordination for immigrants and refugees. So thank you to Gail and the Housing Alliance for inviting us today. So here's the agenda. You can see we're going to give you an overview of the refugee resettlement process, make sure you understand who refugees are. We'll go over housing guidelines for refugees newly arrived to the United States, why it's a benefit to you as a landlord to rent to refugees, the challenges, and we've spoken to some landlords and tenants, refugee tenants, to give you a sense of what their take is on this, and then feel free to ask questions. So Jewish Family and Children's Service is a nonprofit, non-denominational 501c3 nonprofit. We offer many, many services. Refugee resettlement is one of many. We have a career development center, adoption, seniors services, counseling, a food pantry, critical needs, and other services. So we're a full-service agency with refugee resettlement being at its core and has been a part of JFCS since its founding 80 years ago. The mission of JFNCS is to support people through life's changes and challenges. So Taylor, you want to give a short explanation?
Sure. So this is Taylor Hennessy. I work at Northern Area Multi-Service Center in the Community Assistance and Refugee Resettlement Department as the housing case manager for all newly arrived refugee families. Northern Area Multi-Service Center is the parent agency of a network of 3 nonprofit health and human services agencies based in Allegheny County. This network includes Northern Area Companies, Pennsylvania Residential Developers, and Landmark Home Healthcare Services. We work together under one single vision which unifies a set of seemingly diverse services, and the single vision is to build independence.
Okay. So I'm going to go over refugee and resettlement basics now. So I always like to think of this in the bigger scheme of things, that we are almost all immigrants living in the U.S. unless you're a Native American. All of us have immigrant paths, and our families came to the U.S. for different reasons. And these are some of them: economic reasons, educational, religious freedom, forced migration, which is the slavery with a very sad situation, and lastly, to escape an unsafe homeland. And that's more or less what we're talking about today, are refugees. So there is the legal definition of a refugee, and those of us working with refugees, these are the people we're working with, because people use that word in everyday conversation. but there is the legal definition, which includes a person who is outside his or her country of nationality, has a well-founded fear of persecution based on one of these 5 reasons: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And that is from the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, UNHCR, an acronym we toss around a lot in our world. A refugee is someone who cannot return home safely. So that brings me to the next slide, which is, we use the word immigrant also. An immigrant is somebody who wants to stay in the United States permanently. So a refugee is an immigrant, but not all immigrants are refugees. An immigrant could include somebody who comes here to reunify with family, or someone who comes here and gets a work visa, and then they get a green card here. So refugee, hoping you understand this, is a subset of an immigrant population. And what differentiates them is they never intended to come here. They didn't come, they have no other choice. So the refugee arrives here after many years, up to decades, living in an unsafe situation in limbo. And typically they flee their home. They flee the border, and under dangerous circumstance, could be under gunfire, risk of enslavement. It's a government actor that has to be the perpetrator of the danger. They have to find somebody from the United Nations to give them the refugee status. So already they have the savvy, they have to find somebody, and there are people from the UN in these danger zones, and they have to make their case that they cannot return home. So at that point, they can register as a refugee, which simply means they will not be forced to return to their homeland. And their goal is to go home, and they can wait and wait and wait in refugee camps or in urban settings where they would be illegally there, but they do have the refugee paper. The United States at some point may open up applications from different parts of the world to the refugee resettlement in the U.S. process. They must make their persecution claim multiple times in person, every member of the family, and there are 13 steps involved now in this security vetting program with every imaginable federal agency, cross-referencing, fingerprinting, biometrics. So people who are concerned about security, there is a ton of security for refugees. However, there is none for tourists or people coming here to study. So just to write that myth that these people aren't scrutinized, they are highly scrutinized, more than any other immigrant. If they get accepted into the U.S. program, they go to cultural orientation overseas where they learn about life in America, and then in fact they have to pay back their travel loan. That is a promissory note they sign, and they must do it in order to move on in citizenship. Numbers of refugees are higher now than any time since World War II. So we're looking at 20 to 25 million people who have fled their homelands and have that refugee status. Then there's something called internally displaced persons, IDP. Another 40 million people are displaced within their own country. They've left their villages or towns, and they have had to move, which that is not a refugee, that is an IDP, but they are likewise homeless. Refugees want to go home. That is unlike an immigrant that's looking for economic opportunity or educational opportunities here. So that's something to keep in mind. They cannot safely return. Typically, they will want to stay where they fled to. It might be a neighboring country where they know the language or the culture, but that's not often the case that they can settle there. That country may also be in disarray and can't absorb the numbers. You're seeing that playing out live in the Syria situation with people fleeing to Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey and them, moving on because there's just too many people there. what it is called when they come to the U.S., it's called third country resettlement, because they fled their original homeland to a second country, and now they're coming to a third. And with all the resettlement in the first world countries, of which U.S. takes the most, it amounts to less than 1%. So there's just a little over 100,000 people being resettled every year right now. Out of the 20 to 5 million, that's far less than 1%. These are the numbers the United States has been taking in the last couple years. It's 85,000 is the target for this year because of the Syrian crisis. The President's administration has requested 100,000 for next year, but there'll be a new administration, so we don't know what that will stand. But over the last 30 years of this program, it's been supported by both Democrats and Republicans and has been a safe program for certain numbers every year. So why do we do this? Why is the U.S. taking people? It's to save lives. While it's not the answer to the problems in the world, it is we are saving lives of a small percentage. Who gets to come is not decided locally. It's not decided by anyone in Pittsburgh. It's decided by the president and the cabinet, and they select the populations and the percentages. And they'll look at the danger, how long they're in refugee camps, and whether some people can return. And, you know, that's what they wanted to begin with. These are the people who simply will never be able to return. I also want to throw in here, because I'm asked this a lot, are people legal in this country? Yes, the second their foot sets onto U.S. soil, which is at an airport, at one of the port of entries, they have what's called an I-94. You may hear this if you're a landlord who rents to refugees, but they have this document which allows them to work and live in the U.S. indefinitely. At a year, they're eligible for the green card or legal permanent residence, and they can apply for citizenship at 5 years. So that legal status gives them ability also to access all public benefits, and the only thing they really can't do is vote. So who's coming to Pittsburgh now? We have been actually very fortunate that a large number of Bhutanese, they're ethnic Nepali people, sad for them that they've been forced out of their country over 20 years ago from this little country in the Himalayas where you could barely see it with that arrow, and they've lived in refugee camps for 20 years. We've got about 5,000 to 7,000 Bhutanese living in Pittsburgh. That wave is starting to decrease, those that are coming from overseas. Congolese. In Eastern Congo is one of the worst civil wars maybe in history, and there are some numbers of Congolese coming to Pittsburgh. They have been in camps also for a long time, very unsafe camps. The Syrians, I think we're seeing that in the newspaper now. Some of them have been in camps, and some of them have been living in the cities. A very traumatized group, and as living through the war that they have experienced and total destruction of their country. So who goes where? Why would they show up in Pittsburgh? So there are 9 national agencies, and all of us locals are connected to one of the 9. There are 350 or so locals across the U.S., and they would come to Pittsburgh if they have a friend or family member here that requests them and that the refugee wants to mutually come here. And we also look at how many people we can handle in Pittsburgh. How many apartments are there in Pittsburgh? I mean, that is probably one of the biggest reasons we can't take any more. Housing is a giant challenge for us, and Taylor's going to get into that a little more. So there are 3 refugee resettlement agencies in Pittsburgh, northern area, and us taking the most, and then a third, Ajapo, at about 120 individuals. We are all operating under the U.S. State Department Refugee Resettlement Program. So what do we do in resettlement? We get notification of an arrival, and we just start looking for housing. We have go-to landlords, and we'll ask them, do they have a 2-bedroom? We have an example of a family of 4 coming. and that has to be set up, and Taylor's going to get more into that. They get a financial package which we disperse, and we document it up and down how we spend it. The family has to sign off on it. We connect them to all the services they need to set up here, whether it's Social Security, they get a refugee medical assistance, they get food stamps, and a cash assistance. We take them to the doctor, we put kids in school, etc. We teach them about life in America. And why in red, you see housing and employment. Those are the two gigantic challenges, and the make or break us is that they have housing and that they can pay for the housing with the jobs that we're going to get them. And we also help them on their path to citizenship, because they were homeless, they have a home now in the U.S., and eventually citizenship. This financial package is about $1,000 a person. And as much as we can put towards rent and security deposit, we do. But we still have to get them all these other things so that they have a basic needs apartment. And they need to get around with the bus tickets. We get them a cell phone with some months of service and a little bit of cash. If the family is a family of four, we're talking $4,000 or so dollars, depending on the rent and utilities. We're hoping at least 3 months that floats them. If they're very conservative with their spending, and then our employment teams are all over these adults to get them jobs, which are typically survival jobs. And here we are, the post-arrival income. They do qualify for our cash assistance. There's some refugee cash. There's a couple of ways that comes in. But the key is that an adult or adults in the family take a job. And even if they have high English and high degrees from a foreign country, typically their first jobs in America are survival jobs. Could be at a hotel, commercial laundry, maybe mail processing at a bank. But we know that some of these folks are highly skilled with great English, but that at the beginning, this rocky beginning, they just need to have income to cover their expenses. And believe me, landlords who are listening, we know this. If there's a disabled person in the family, we'll help them apply for Social Security disability, which would also provide income. It takes about 6 months at least to get that income going. And for people arriving over 65, they get income too, and that's very immediate. It's a small amount, but it's a gigantic help for apartments. So we see success that refugees, this is early resettlement now in the first 6 months, that refugees are safe in their home. They know how to pay rent. They know what to do in that apartment. We've got the kids in public school. Those that everyone must see the doctor and make sure that they get their needs attended to. We got adults working, and those that need extra help are supported. So that's what we're looking for in the early resettlement process. And now, Taylor, take it away on the housing guidelines.
All right, thank you, Leslie. So now that you have a background as to who a refugee is and the services that we provide at the resettlement agencies, I will now go into more specifics on what we look for when we are trying to secure housing. So we do have guidelines for the housing that we secure. Of course, we want the families to live in a safe and friendly neighborhood. We also want to find something that is affordable for the family. And we do have a sheet that we can send to everyone listening today. I can give that to Gail, and it shows the target rent range for our families. So depending on whether it's a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, or 3-bedroom. But to give you an idea, we normally try to find a 2-bedroom around $550. That's at the lower end, and then the higher end would be around $750. But this also depends on which utilities are included. So before we say yes to the apartment, we do make sure to meet with the property owner and have a thorough walkthrough, and we have a sheet of paper, a document that we have to complete for each newly arrived family, showing that the house is in good condition. All of the utilities need to be turned on before the family arrives or before they move into the apartment. Of course, this would be a requirement for any new tenant. Most landlords ask that the utilities are transferred into the tenant's name in a normal situation. Unfortunately, with refugees, when they first arrive, they are unable to place the utility in their name until they receive their social security number. However, we do help the family in transferring the utilities into their name as soon as possible. It takes about a month to 2 months to transfer the utility, but all of the bills that are received are reimbursed to the landlord or paid directly to the electric or gas company. The next guideline that we look for is we want the house to be close to public transportation. Depending on the composition of the family and the health of the family members, we look for a house that is less than 15-minute walk away from the property. Normally, I would like to find something that's closer than 15 minutes, but depending on the neighborhood or depending on the house, sometimes I will rent something that is around 15-20 minutes away, as long as the family is young. Also, we look to see which grocery stores are close by, and if the unit does not have a washer and dryer in the property, then we make sure that there is a laundromat that is within walking distance or a short bus ride away from the house. So we are given about a week to 3 weeks notice before the refugee family arrives to Pittsburgh. That gives us a little bit of time to find something that is suitable for the family. And we also will work with the U.S. tie, which is the family member or the friend who lives in Pittsburgh, to see if they will provide housing. But 3 weeks, it goes by fast. 1 week, of course, goes by even quicker. But the turnaround is very quick, so if we contact a landlord, the whole process happens very rapidly. So there is an immediate move-in, and we do need to prepare the house before the family or the individual arrives. So if you're wondering what all of this entails, we do provide furniture for the family, and we will buy household items, and we purchase the groceries for the first week before they receive their food assistance, their cash for food assistance. Another important factor in housing for refugees is that we try to create a community for each population. It's very important to create these communities because once the 90 days, the reception and placement period has passed, it's good for the families to be close to individuals or other families who speak the same language or who have lived in Pittsburgh for a while and are able to support them by showing them how to get around the city, and also just emotional support for the long run is always really important. So we want to place families near each other. That is the first step whenever I look for housing, is I look in neighborhoods where I know there are other refugee families living close by. And another guideline would be whether or not we would rent a house or an apartment. Normally, I look for apartments because the utilities that need to be paid are typically only gas and electric. A house, you have to pay, all of the utilities, and that can be complicated when teaching the family which bills to look out for at the beginning, which we do help the family in sorting their mail and showing them how to pay their bills, who to send the checks to, and we assist them with setting up the bank account so they will have checks. A house would be preferred for a family who has a disabled family member. At least in my experience, it is very difficult to find handicap accessible housing in Pittsburgh. Almost every house I've come across at least has one set of stairs leading up to the entryway. I'm experiencing this right now. I have a family who's coming and they need a first floor house with a first floor bedroom and bathroom, which is very difficult to find. There are apartment complexes that have these type of units, but they are very strict with who they will allow to move in. And then also, depending on the family size and the composition, if it's a larger family, then it's also nearly impossible to find a 3-bedroom to 4-bedroom townhome or apartment. So in those cases, I normally would rent a house. Lastly, another factor to look into whenever we rent a house versus an apartment is the yard maintenance. So some landlords require that the tenant would maintain their snow removal and cut the grass. And this is just another factor in looking at the family composition, making sure they have someone in the family who would be able to complete these tasks and be able to follow through with those requirements. So the lease for the apartments and houses that we rent are typically 1 year, but it is preferred to find housing with a 6-month lease. A lot of families would prefer a 6-month, but they do sign the 1-year lease. We sit with the family. Myself as a housing case manager, I sit with the family, I review the lease, I even go to the basics of asking if they know what a lease is, who a landlord is, and what a tenant or who a tenant is. We go through each line and have an interpreter explain the legality of a lease and the importance of following the requirements on the lease. But sticking on that topic of the lease, the agency does not sign the lease, and we never act as a co-signer either. So the lease is always in the family's name. Sometimes if the family has a U.S. tie, so a family member or a friend who lives in Pittsburgh, they can sign as the co-signer, but that's not always, the U.S. tie is not always available. So most families will come here without a family or a friend who is already living in Pittsburgh. What most landlords ask me at the very beginning, of course, is how much financial support do we provide? So as Leslie had mentioned, we are given a certain amount of money for each family, and that allows us to pay the security deposit and 3 to 4 months rent. And this is all depending on the family composition, the size, and the program that they're enrolled in. Lastly, we do help the family in training how to make phone calls for maintenance requests, how to maintain the property so it is then given back in the same condition or nearly the same condition as it was rented. And we sit with the client, we show them how to write a check and who to mail the rent check to. So the housing needs that that our local agencies face every year is we resettle, you saw the numbers, around 600 total in the city, and that results in needing 125 to 150 units. So we are in desperate need of housing, and any new contact is always appreciated, and we are always trying to expand our network with landlords.
Okay, so this is Leslie again, and I'm going to go over the benefits of renting to refugees. So why rent to them? I see this as twofold, and most importantly, it makes good business sense. They have our agency support, and we are teaching them, pay your rent, pay your rent. That's basically our giant message. Go to work and pay your rent. Those two things. So I have yet to hear a landlord complain that our folks don't pay rent. That's not the issue. We'll talk about challenges later. They do arrive as families. It's not like single young people. They're going to be, typically someone's at home, so it's good for the neighborhood. They are pre-screened. As I told you earlier, you couldn't have more background screening if you tried. They have no criminal history whatsoever, no terroristic background. They are not drug users. They're screened medically as well for any communicable illness. So, and we can send you documentation on the screening process if you have any questions. So it's more than anything you'd get out of a state police background check. Many are long-term tenants. If we find housing where we can create a neighborhood, they will move in and their friends will move in, and we've got, a nice neighborhood of people who care about where they live. Refugees are on what I call an upward trajectory. It is rock bottom when they come, just because of what the loss they've incurred, but they are very savvy and resourceful as a group. To be one of the 1% that gets here, I can only imagine what that took. There's a tremendous amount of skills. People may not have English, but they probably have 3 to 5 languages. They have tremendous strengths that I believe makes this job very enriching for me. And the kids are going to go to school, and many will go to college, and the families are going to buy cars, and then they're going to buy houses, and then they're going to start businesses. So while this beginning period is super challenging, they will blossom for the most part. And what I mean by citizenship at stake is they are not citizens for the first 5 years. If they don't abide by laws, they don't get to stay. So they have, not that they already come with a clean record, they have every reason and even more reason to stay law-abiding. And I actually thought of one more reason. I mean, our city's population hasn't been in decline. Maybe it's a little holding steady now. This is a way to increase our population, revitalize our neighborhoods with good people, people who care, people who are going to be leaders and community leaders and risk takers and start companies. And they do. Next, another reason. It's the right thing to do as far as being a good person and showing compassion and kindness. And in a little while, I'm going to quote from some landlords. I mean, you are providing the first home for somebody who's had no home. It's very meaningful to the family and to the landlords. You are saving a life. This means more people can come. I think it feels good personally to be helping. And I know I'm in touch with my family's immigrant past several generations ago, and I think many of us are. So that does tug at the heartstrings. But overall, it is a good business deal for the landlord. Challenges.
So, of course, there are challenges with renting to refugees, and the first one, which I'm sure we could all think of, is the language. Most of our clients, most of the newly arrived families, do not speak English. However, we do provide interpretation. So a lot of the time we will find someone who is a very strong leader in the community, and they will then act as the interpreter. So they are there for the very beginning with explaining the lease and helping with the maintenance requests, but they're also kind of there for the long run as well, since they're connected to the community. Also, the cultural differences can be a challenge, and that is why we train the family with showing them how to use a stove, how to winterize their property, because as we all know, it gets very cold in Pittsburgh, and it's never a good situation if a pipe bursts during the winter. So we do review all of this with the families, and we show them how to properly clean their apartments as well. So the housing case manager, the agency, serves as a cultural liaison, and we bridge this gap between the landlord and the tenant. So one concern that landlords have, and this is always brought up during the initial conversation, is, who's going to pay for the rent after the final month of support from the agency. And I can say that we as agencies work very closely with the adults in the family and tell them repeatedly that they are required to pay their rent. They have signed a legal document, and it is their responsibility to pay their rent for that 4th or 5th month. So we work with them to help secure employment, and they are eligible for the employment services for the first 5 years that they are in the United States. Beyond the rent payments, if they did not make those payments, then it would impact the agency's good reputation, and we would not have long-standing landlord relationships if every family were not paying their rent. And we do keep open communication, so if there is an individual who is about to start working, or they have secured employment but have not received their first paycheck until maybe the first week of the month, then we will tell the landlord. There's always open communication. That is the number one thing I tell, or one of the top 10 things I tell my clients, is that you have to stay in open communication. If there's any issue with paying rent, you must tell us as soon as possible so we can avoid any type of issue with housing. And also emergencies, we do teach the family as soon as they arrive their first night in the apartment or the house, how to use the cell phone. We teach them, how to use the 911 phone number in case they have a fire or something like that. Not that that has ever happened, but we do teach them what actions to take if there is an emergency. So they have contact information for the community member, the interpreter, and there's always at least at our agency, and I'm sure the same at Jewish Family, a person who is on call, and that means if it's the weekend or if it's past 5 p.m., we are available to answer the phone. And the same goes for the landlords. I keep my phone on me all the time, and if a landlord is trying to contact me during the weekend and there is an emergency, then I always answer my phone. Some solutions to the challenges that we face are we have our office hours Monday through Friday. Clients can walk in, but it is preferred to schedule an appointment. So if they ever have questions, even after their reception and placement period, the first 3 months, then they are welcome to come to the office and ask for any advice or any assistance. We provide workshops to show the families financial literacy, and we provide workshops also to explain proper maintenance and care of the property, so they are ending their lease term with an apartment that is in close to the same condition that it was when they had moved in. Also, the case manager, the lead case manager, meets with the family at least 3 times during their first 90 days in their new home. So the first time is 24 hours after they arrive, and then there's the 30-day home visit, the 60-day home visit, and the final home visit, which that is only with the main case manager, but we also, if we have the capacity with volunteers, we'll send a volunteer into the home to help the family look through their mail and allow the family to ask any questions that they might have on how to maintain the property. Lastly, we have the ISIC program, which is a newer program. It stands for Immigrant Service and Connections, and this is a service that is provided to the refugee families after the first 90 days in the country. So this will support families who have special problems. Maybe they have a medical condition, and they need assistance being connected to a medical provider or medical transportation, those type of issues.
Okay, so I have been working with the landlords for the 8.5 years I've been doing this, and I reached out to a couple and asked them what are the benefits that they reap from working with the refugees, the challenges, and is it worth it? So one of them said, the benefits are that I feel like we are bigger than just an apartment community. I feel like we are leaving the world better than we found it. And I feel like we offer an expanded worldview and exposure to the residents that live here. It's an enriching opportunity. Another one said, I find that helping a family who's a refugee takes a tremendous relief off of their shoulders. Given their circumstances and why they're now here, I find it very rewarding to help them find the most basic of needs, a home to live in. So many have been so incredibly thankful, and it makes my entire day to have them smile and thank me for helping them. On the communication issue, challenges, communication, one guy said, communication can be a problem, and a lack of understanding from the rest of the tenants that already live there have about the refugees. Why are they here? And what have they been through that might help them fit in better? So after he said this, it occurred to me we should probably have a meeting of all the tenants to tell them what I'm telling you today. Another one said that sometimes they do not truly understand what is required of them for the lease, giving proper notice, keeping the apartment clean or cleaning it properly, and reporting problems. So communication and not understanding some of the ways of taking care of the apartment. We always call that the learning curve, and there is a learning curve. I would say that is what they're reflecting. Do the benefits outweigh the challenges? The first one said yes, by far. The other one, yes, it's rewarding to help them, and I really appreciate having the case managers to help me when there are issues. So that's the landlord perspective.
And for the refugee tenant experience, I spoke with a couple of our clients, and one family who had arrived last year, it's a family of 5. I found a house for them, which was kind of in the back part of this neighborhood on a quiet street. The mother was she said she was very happy to live in a place where her kids have a yard to play and where the neighbors smile. So it's always nice to hear that the families are happy with where they are living, because I'm sure, with each refugee, their experience has been different, but for a lot of them who have lived in a refugee camp, the space was very limited. So to have a yard for the kids to run around and play is very rewarding for the family. Also, a family who had just arrived this summer, they said that they're happy they finally have a place where they can sleep in peace and quiet. So their experience, just like the landlord, it can be challenging because they are coming to a completely different culture and some of the appliances they've never seen before, but overall they are happy to be here, and it takes time and patience for everyone to adjust to the change, but they're overall happy.
So this is what we consider success, that the refugees feel connected to the community, empowered to handle new challenges. They're self-sufficient. They can give back to newer refugees and their new community, and they have hope. So here's a reminder that refugees bring a lot to their new country. And some Bhutanese people at Mount Washington. So that's it from us. Does anyone have questions?
Thank you, ladies. I'm going to go ahead and unmute the line, so if anybody has any questions, they can
The conference has been unmuted. The conference has been unmuted.
Are there any questions from the folks on the line?
Anybody learned something they didn't know?
Well, I, for one, learned a lot that I didn't know. I wasn't very familiar with the refugee system at all. But I did have a question about the ISAC program. Now, you said it provided services to refugees after the sort of 90-day time span, but I was wondering, can other immigrants access that service, or perhaps refugees that were maybe served by another agency?
Yeah, ISAC is for any immigrant in Allegheny County of any kind. It's not just for refugees.
Excellent.
And there are 6 partner agencies. It's actually, the lead is Jewish Family, Northern Area Multi-Service Center is a partner, Greater Pittsburgh Literacy Council, South Hills Interfaith Movement, otherwise known as SHIM, and 2 Latino agencies, Latino Family Center and Casa San Jose. So people can enter ISAC through any of those 6, or there's a main number. It's 412-742-4200, and they can get served at the agency that makes most sense. And there's a lot of office hours, too, where we put someone in different refugee and immigrant neighborhoods. That's more convenient. They can bring their questions closer to home. So we've been setting those up where there are larger numbers of vulnerable refugees and immigrants. And
Excellent.
I just want to add, there are other grant-funded programs for refugees. This initial phase lasts 90 days, but there's other, besides Isaac, there's several other refugee programs. So people sort of move into different streams based on their need. So it's not just a 90-day program. The financial assistance is only 90 days, but after that there's other things, especially around employment and any kind of basic needs.
Excellent. Are there any other questions?
Is my mic on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Okay. Have you ever had people offer up their houses for refugees to stay in?
Yes. That's not, we are required to find permanent housing
Okay.
in 90 days. And you don't, while if there's an extreme case where we got 2 days notice, we might want to plop them somewhere, but
Right.
and they've been moving around a lot. The U.S. requires it to be permanent. You want the kids to be in school. They need that base.
Yeah.
Model in Pittsburgh, we all look for permanency. If it's a family that says, we've never had them go with a total stranger. There could be a family member here where they'll move in.
Right.
And that money their money that they would get, they get no matter where they live. But that's not, it's hard to have a refugee family, and they need a lot of attention. They need to learn. We're really trying to teach them how to make it in Pittsburgh, how to ride the bus. What does it mean to pay rent? What does it mean to have a job and budget? What do things cost? Because while they were in the camp, they might have had a tent over their head and some rations. They have to understand, here you work for all your money. So we just kick them right out there into that scenario. At least that's the model here, and I think pretty much everywhere in the U.S. And that's what that money is for.
Yeah, the same at Northern area. We have had people contact us to see if they could sponsor a family, but we do look for permanent housing. If there's ever a special situation where we're given less than a week's notice, then maybe finding or securing a house in that short of a time frame will force us to use temporary housing, but that's always the last resort. We always would want to place them in the permanent, or at least the first house for the first year.
And actually, to get some of the public benefits, you have to show the lease.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So many ins and outs, and in order to get that customer assistance funding to cut the electric and rent and the gas, you need to show the lease. And so we're on the up and up. We're keeping the occupancy where it needs to be and going through what it should happen, teaching them the right way. Someone else say something?
Sorry.
Okay. Well, if we don't have any other questions, I want to thank Leslie and Taylor again for providing us with this really great webinar. There is their contact information, a copy of the recording, the PowerPoint, and any other informational materials will be sent out to all of you folks on the line. And I just want to say thank you again for participating, and we look forward to your participation for future webinars. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.